This is the Lights Out Boxing Podcast, proudly sponsored by Spartans Law.
This is Faisal Khan for Lights Out, proudly sponsored by Spartans Law, and this is podcast 45 of the Lights Out Boxing Podcast. A happy new year to you all. Ron, happy new year to you too, mate.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, how does it feel to be in 2022 now?
Very good. let's hope. Got a lot of boxing to come this way, with spectators, obviously, not behind closed doors.
Hopefully it's a better
like
year.
We started last year.
Oh,
yeah.
Tell me about it. Hopefully it's a better year than the last 2 years, right?
Absolutely.
First of all, just a quick reminder to the fans out there, if you haven't already, to get more Lights Out Boxing content, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, comment and share. And if you want to know more about Team Lights Out, below in the description are our social media links. I'd like to be joined by Ron today for podcast 45. 2 in 2, man. I mean, that pairs
I'm not careful, I might make this a habit.
That pairs you play contracts really doing wonders for you, isn't it?
Well, it's doing wonderful for your numbers. You've got more subscribers, more likes, and more views.
It's kind of the opposite. We've lost. Now I'm only joking, Ron. Good to see you, man. And
Pleasure.
How was the festive season?
It's not too bad. Nice time with the family. It was Mum's birthday the other day.
Happy
So
birthday.
just absolutely, it's lovely. Good Christmas movies. Don't care what anyone says. Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
No. Let's have it straight. It is not Christmas without the Home Alone movies.
Yep, absolutely. But Die Hard. I know Shannon Courtney's been kind of kicking off at the moment on her social media, but
You follow her religiously, don't you?
I do indeed.
Fair enough. But no, listen, it's good to hear that you had a good Christmas. Still not in the next phase of lockdown, so it's kind of started off the year well. And we do start off the year with a good heavyweight fight tonight, later on tonight in America, between former heavyweight champion of the world Charles Martin as he takes on Mr. Luis Ortiz. It's a fight that's not really gained much exposure.
Or attention, really. It's just kind of gone under the radar a little bit. I think this is a fight where you win, you stay relevant in the division.
Yeah.
You lose, then that's it. Where do you go from there? Charles Martin, he spectacularly lost his title to Anthony Joshua.
Well, let's not say spectacularly, because I've never seen a world champion be more than happy to
spectacularly abysmal. Let's just say that. Okay.
I think abysmal, too good a
then
word
he
to
had
use.
some problems out the ring as well. We expected him to kind of crack on and re-challenge for that title, but he's not been anywhere close. Luis Ortiz, the man that keeps on aging, but still fighting.
As our good friend Nadeem likes to call him, always the bridesmaid but never the bride.
Yeah.
Which is a bit harsh if you think about it.
I like Luis Ortiz.
Yeah.
I think he's an honest fighter. Gave a great account of himself against Deontay Wilder.
Do you remember that first
Oh,
fight?
wow.
Put it together, didn't we?
Absolutely. And he would have won that fight.
Would have won the second one as well had he not got knocked out, because he was winning every round, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was really convincing.
So you reckon that this is practically
Just stay relevant.
whoever loses this fight is done?
Where do you go from there?
I kind of go with that slogan. Whoever loses this fight is done.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of potential fights for the winner. You've got people like Joy Joyce. You've got all these up and coming boxers like Hrgovic, who, if you want to name
Spicoli in a couple of weeks, another good heavyweight fight.
Yeah. So if you want, you can go across the pond and have a fight with Luis Ortiz, and he'll sell out tickets. I'm not sure with Charles Martin as much, but if he beats Luis Ortiz, he stays relevant, goes up the rankings. I don't know which rankings.
I think the IBF is the
Is it the IBF
ranking that they're looking at, which we know is held by Alexander Usyk. So I like the fight. I think it's a really good fight. Not a bad way to start the year.
How does it go?
I think Ortiz knocks him out.
Yeah, early,
Late.
Ortiz is a very good boxer.
He
I
is.
do like his. He's a Cuban. Cubans are known for their artistry in the ring. They're a good high ring IQ. He made Deontay Wilder look foolish for almost 10 rounds until that train wreck. It was going to catch up with him at some point.
And for 6 rounds in the second fight, he made Wilder look like an amateur, and then obviously that right hand, that ferocious right hand.
But
It's a good fight.
He got up. You know,
did.
I remember that when he got up, and you know, what I mean, it was like his pride kind of carrying him up.
Watching the first fight, and like I think the first few rounds we were sat there, and you were like, "Has this fight actually started?" And then all of a sudden, it turned from like a boxing match to a barroom brawl, and it was. Look, with Ortiz, you get what you pay for. I think Ortiz is very exciting.
Yeah,
but I think if anything, Charles Martin's got more to lose in this one because he's the younger fighter. And he still gets a lot of criticism for that performance against Joshua. I still criticise that performance. You know, he gave it the big end and the gloves are off. Going to walk this earth like a god.
Walk over you,
yeah. And then he's just on the floor smiling. But listen, it's a good fight. I like this fight. How do you see it panning out?
Ortiz. But, you know, if Charles Martin does get the win here, you know, what would it do for his career? You know, there's a lot of good fights
he's
out
not
there.
getting any younger, and he's fought twice for a world title. I don't see him getting a third world title shot. Not ahead of Joey.
Well, he's got money fights that he can make. You know, he's nowhere near the elite level. You know, what we're talking about, the Joshuas, the Furies, the Usyks. He's nowhere near that. But there's like this middle.
But what he is, though, he is a problem. For anyone that he fights, he's a hard night's work.
Yeah.
I always liked the possibility of an Andy Ruiz fight. Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz. You know, two heavyweights, two podgy heavyweights.
Yeah.
Powerful fighters. Makes for a good fight. I reckon that's something that he could potentially look at if he does win on Saturday night.
Well, I mean, where's Andy Ruiz? I mean, since... he did fight... he did have a fight against... Ariola, that's it. But you know...
Anyway, talk about a few more things before we get onto the main topic. A couple of rumours. Hearing a rumour around Twitter, Chisora versus Deontay Wilder. Do you like that? I actually like that fight.
Be a great build-up.
One. And two, I think that's a good fight.
How do you think it goes? You know?
Do you know why I like that fight? Is because Wilder needs... I'm not going to say a warm-up, but he needs a good test if he is to come back. You don't want to put him in with a guy you know he's going to beat.
Someone that's going to provide a bit of resistance, that's going to come forward and is not going to be scared by a few bombs being thrown.
And Chisora showed in his last fight, he's no mug.
Absolutely not.
I like Chisora versus Wilder. If we're going off on what should Wilder needs to do next, you know, I don't think he should be fighting for a world title anytime soon. Forget whatever rankings he's with the WBC. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, but I think Chisora Wilder's a good fight to make. I'm a massive fan of Chisora versus Wilder. Yeah. Good build-up as well.
I like it. Yeah, the build-up's going to be exciting between the two of them. Both really good characters outside of the ring as well as in the ring as well.
Big last week.
How do you see that one going, potentially? I don't know.
I think Wilder beats him, but I just think...
What, KO early?
Yes. There's no way that fight ends on points. If that fight ends on points, I shave my hair off.
Gosh.
I shave my hair off if Wilder Chisora goes to points.
I mean, my query is who guesses that first. You know, that's problem with these two fighters. They do load up quite heavy with their
If you look at both fighters, right, Chisora's gone the distance more than Wilder has.
Yes.
And when we've seen Wilder's go into deep water, i.e. the fights versus Tyson Fury,
he shows he's drowning. Yeah.
You know what was a worry for me watching his 3 fights with Fury?
Yep.
You know, looking back to that first fight, which we're going to talk about in a bit, when he knocked down Fury in the 12th round, he looked knackered. And I was just thinking, like, wait, hold on a second. You've just put him down, and yet you look blown out.
I think he put his whole heart and soul into that kind of actual knockdown.
Yeah.
And look, we could be sitting here all day talking about how the hell did he actually get up from that knockdown.
Yeah.
You know, and full credit to him for doing that.
If it happens, how do you see it panning out? Chisora Wilder?
I would go for Wilder. Just age on his side, that ridiculous power. And you know, it is frightening how much power this man has, and he's nowhere near the weight of these other heavyweights. But yet he can knock those boys over. So it must, you know.
Good fight. I like it.
Yeah.
Jake Paul versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.
Is he still boxing?
He is. He lost his last fight. Last time we done the podcast, we were talking about what Jake Paul needs to do next, and we were totally against the idea of him fighting former basketball players,
YouTubers,
MMA
or MMA.
fighters, You know, we said he needs to fight a boxer next, and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. has not done himself any favours in the last few years of his career.
But didn't he lose against Anderson Silva not so long ago?
Yes, he did, and he's also lost to Canelo, and he's just...
That was, you know what, that was really upsetting for boxing.
That was upsetting.
I mean, fair play
his old man,
to Anderson Silva. You know.
But that was a lot more upsetting for his old man. I mean, you know what his old man achieved in the game, and then he's brought his son into the boxing world, and he's, you know, he's spoken very highly on his behalf, and it's one of those relationships where the son has not followed the father's footsteps in boxing. I think the Jake Paul fight is a massive risk, and I think if he was to take the Jake Paul fight and lose that fight, his career is tarnished.
What career has he got now? He's not fighting for any titles. He's not fighting regularly. He's turned up to fights overweight.
Anderson Silva was a former MMA fighter, right? Jake Paul is a YouTuber. Okay, Jake Paul did not sit on his backside at the age of 5 years old and be like, I want to be a boxer or a fighter. It was never his intention.
Sure.
At least with Anderson Silva, you've got some sort of fighting background. It's such a risk if he was to fight Jake Paul. You know, the other day when I said about I would like to see Hay versus McGregor. I mean, watching interviews after our podcast, I'm kind of warming to the fight with Conor McGregor. Sorry, I said Hay versus Jake Paul, not Hay versus McGregor.
Okay.
I'm now warming to Jake Paul versus Conor McGregor. I actually really like the idea of that fight now.
Again, it's detracting away from boxing purists. You know what I mean? Like when Conor, no disrespect, but when he fought against Floyd, that performance,
horrendous.
It just didn't look natural. It looked very odd. His stance, his striking, and he gassed out very early in that fight as well. So, look, it sells. It will get views. It'll get likes. It'll get clicks. You know what I mean? It will do that. But will I be paying £30 to watch it? No.
Not unless you've got a dodgy box.
Yeah.
Which I don't have, of course. I like to pay hundreds of pounds a month for my Sky and BT subscription. But nonetheless, Jake Paul versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. There's been offers made. Apparently, Chavez Jr.'s turned around and said if he loses, he won't take any money.
Well, I'm hearing the figure of 5 million.
Well, you said the other...
Masvidal was,
Off the camera, you said the other day Jake Paul brings in numbers and he brings in money.
He does. And I think what I've heard in regards to that they will give him a percentage of the pay-per-views, and they'll give him, 5 million. This guy's hardly fighting anyway, and he was only a real big draw because of his dad. Now that's waning, so he's probably trying to. If I was him in his situation, I'd jump on this, and make him. Yeah, look, if he loses, he's got $5 million to cry into, So it's. But as a boxing purist, as someone who really enjoys it, I wouldn't want to watch it. But it makes sense financially.
Tyson Fury, according to his promoter, Frank Warren, is going to fight in March, but not defend his WBC title, and not against Dillian Whyte. Can I go first?
Please. I'm trying to hold back here.
Do you know what? Because I actually need a couple of seconds. I think I'll let you go first because I might say something I might regret. Where do you stand on this?
I mean, look, first of all, I want to... For Dillian, I mean, what does this man have to do to get a bloody world title shot?
That fight's not happening accordingly to Frank Warren because of the split and because of the ongoing arbitration case.
Yeah. And, what he's being offered, I think it was an 80-20 split. And...
Ridiculous.
In a grand scheme of things, this is his biggest fight of his career. Yeah, you want to, maximise the money that you're going to get. You're going to go in against the world's best heavyweight boxer. You're going to have all this TV money. You want to get big part of the pie. You don't want a little measly crumbs. And that's what all he deserves. And we were talking about it off air in terms of career and opponents that they face. Dillian Whyte's got a better resume than Tyson Fury, but the difference is Tyson Fury has won those big fights. The Klitschko, the Wilders, that's why he's good as he is. Dillian Whyte, he's been his worst enemy because he's took these difficult fights and that fight against Povetkin that he lost. When he lost that
Wrong
fight,
the right though, won the second.
yeah,
fight.
of course, but he lost his interim kind of position that he held, and he had to kind of restart all over again. It doesn't matter what he had put in. But the point I'm saying that I feel for him, and he's in every I back him that he's in every right to ask for more money. What that percentage is.
Mm-hmm.
He needs to reflect better on his, what he brings to the table. And he's an exciting fighter. I love watching Dillian Whyte. He brings drama into the ring.
100%.
His fights are great.
I'm listening to that interview with IFL TV. Shout out to IFL TV, always providing tremendous boxing content. I think I was lost for words. Like, we know Usyk's going to fight Joshua in a rematch. We don't want to see Fury versus Wilder 4. There's no point of that fight ever happening again unless Fury lost his belt and Wilder won. Look, this is, for me, the fourth best fight you can make in this division right now. Fury versus Usyk is the first one. The second one is Usyk versus Joshua, the rematch, and the third one is Fury versus AJ. And I kind of hate saying that because I always said Fury versus AJ is going to be the fight to define the division. It's not now because AJ doesn't hold any belts.
It just depends where the belts are, yeah, I agree.
And then after that, it's Fury versus Whyte. I mean, like, where's your bollocks, Frank Warren? I mean, just let the fight happen. You're going to stop this fight from happening to put Tyson Fury in a warm-up fight in March when there's no need. He is now at the point in his career where he has to be fighting top 5 fighters, top 3 fighters at a must. Because at the end of the day, right, this is poor management. And I kind of feel bad saying this because I'm a big Frank Warren fan. And I think Frank Warren has done tremendous for boxing and go down as one of the greatest promoters of all time, no doubt about it. But why on earth are you going to put Tyson Fury with the position that he's in now in a warm-up fight, not defend his title, in a fight that does not make sense? Yes, probably makes a bit of money, but where's the excitement in all of that?
Not as much money as he would make against Dillian Whyte.
And this whole
who does he fight? Okay, you say a warm-up fight. Who are there any opponents?
No, absolutely no way. All right, fine, okay. You don't want to give a chunk of money to Dillian Whyte, fine. Make him fight Joe Joyce. Make that for the world title fight. At least there's something.
Joe Joyce is out injured. He's broken his
wrist.
That was something. That was a opponent they had lined up potentially.
For me, personally, it's the next best option because nobody wants to see him in a warm-up fight. This run, he's not at a stage of his career where he's just lost or he's coming back after 3-4 years now at the ring. He has fought twice in almost 3 years. That is bad ring and negativity. Okay, yes, we've had the pandemic. He was meant to fight in 2020 in December. It never happened. He's fought once last year. Okay? Don't sit there and tell me it can't be done. Canelo fought 4 times in a year during the pandemic. It can be done. The fight in March where the title is not on the line against whoever it's going to be against makes no sense at all to me. It just, from a business point, from a defending champion's point, it makes no sense at all.
I mean, I thought after that amazing victory against Deontay Wilder in that third fight, I thought they would have been riding the wave. They'd been thinking, right, Tyson Fury, he's always kind of speculated that he might retire. We don't know how many fights we got left with Tyson Fury. He might win his next fight. He might be like, right, I'm done. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Which is right. It's fair enough because he's, the lineal champion, Ring Magazine champion.
WBC.
List goes on. What he has undefeated as well. But you want him to see that. If you've got 3 or 4 fights in him, let's get the best fights out
100%.
there. The Joshua. I mean, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
It's still a big fight, though.
Joshua's not going to step aside for the Usyk fight. That's going to go ahead. I can't see anyone else apart from Dillian Whyte that I would want to see in the ring with.
I like the Joe Joyce fight. I do like the Joe Joyce fight.
That's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Okay, but still, I'd rather.
I mean, Joe Joyce has got another fight or 2 before he's challenging for world honours.
We could sit here, we could discuss it all day, but the bottom line is this guy is the current defending WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Sorry, Frank, love you to bits and everything. You know, really nice guy. I had the pleasure of interviewing him on a number of occasions. But the bottom line is, either don't fight in March and wait for this whole arbitration split thing to be sorted, or maybe Eddie Hearn comes in and does something with the purse bids. If you're going to fight in March in a warm-up fight and you're not going to defend your world title, vacate it. Vacate it and let Dillian Whyte fight the number 2 mandatory, which is Deontay Wilder, and let them scrap it out for the WBC title. It is only fair. Look at what we have gone through the last few years due to this pandemic. We've lost out on a lot of boxing action. Let's not take the fucking piss here. Vacate. This is coming from his biggest fan. Vacate. Do not take this warm-up fight. It just makes no sense at all. Are you going to pay £25 for a warm-up fight?
What is it going to be against? Is it going to be against Otto Wallin? No, I'm just giving you some names here. You know, who's this warm-up fight?
I have no idea.
I mean, is he...
What, Seferi 2? Francesco Pianetta 2? Third fight with Chisora? No. Look. Make the fight with White, or if not, look at another option and defend your belts now. You've defended your belt once in arguably the greatest heavyweight fight of all time. You are now at a stage where you have to be fighting the top names in this division now. I mean, regardless of what people say about Joshua, win, lose or draw, he's always gone in there with these big fighters. You have to defend your title next.
Well, let's see. Let's hope Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn can come to some sort of agreement, and let's hope that
got more chance of me sitting in the Stratford End singing "Glory, Glory."
And I'm hoping, and I'm desperately hoping that for Dillian Whyte's sake, he gets what he deserves. You know, in terms of what he's done in the sport so far, and he's a guy that doesn't back down, and he should be financially rewarded for his exploits as well.
Run over. Let's move on to what we were mainly going to discuss today. We're going to sort of move away from.
I'm loving this. This is exciting. This is something I've been really looking forward to.
I've not felt this excited since Salah scored a hat-trick against Man United a couple months ago. Today's topic. Which fight in boxing had the most hype and the best build-up? Me and you clashed our heads together, come out with two choices. Going to stay in the heavyweight division. I chose this one. Fury versus Wilder 1. Everyone knows I'm Tyson Fury's number one fan, what I like to think. But there's a number of reasons why I went for this fight as the most hyped and had the best build-up. There was just so many questions surrounding this fight. The first fight was all the way back in December 2018 in the Staples Center in Los Angeles. But this rivalry started a very, very long time before that. If you remember, Deontay Wilder defeated Artur Szpilka in New York, I believe it was, back in 2016. And Fury, prior to that, a few months before that, had won the world titles off Klitschko. So Fury obviously went to the fight, was at ringside, and then was called in by Showtime, and they kind of had a bit of a confrontation. You kind of sensed then that there was something brewing here. But if you go back beyond that, I can't remember who Tyson Fury believed. I believe it was Audley Harrison, and he spoke about fighting the likes of the Joshuas and Tyson Fury, but he was very vocal about fighting Tyson Fury. Now, so we get to this stage, they're at both in the ring, and they've had a bit of a needle, there's a bit of back and forth. It's made you think, do you know what, that's actually a good fight for down the line to happen. Two current world champions, unification fight. And obviously it kind of went downhill for Tyson Fury after that. We know
he was inactive out of the ring for 2 years.
10 days later, he was stripped of the IBF for not agreeing to fight as mandatory. And then obviously Tyson Fury had problems outside of the ring, and he was nowhere to be seen for a number of years. And within that time, you had Wilder carrying on, knocking out people. You had Joshua, who was going to...
He was climbing up the ranks,
become a world champion himself a few months later, beating our friend Charles Martin. So in 2018, we had a situation where everybody in the boxing world was calling for the undisputed clash between Joshua and Wilder. What happens? Tyson Fury announces his comeback. Goes through the the trials and the tribulations with the British Boxing Board of Control, gets his license back, gets back in the gym, loses a whole lot of weight, training with Ben Davison over in Marbella. and he announces he signs with Frank Warren, and he has 2 warm-up fights. The first one, June 2018 against Sefer Seferi.
The one we attended.
The one we attended.
In Manchester, wasn't
Never
it?
spent £60 better in my life. All right, anyway. The best £60 I've ever spent, by the way. Wasn't a boxing classic. It was more like a show for Tyson Fury. And then a few months later, he goes to Belfast and he fights Francesco Pianetta, gets 10 rounds under his belt. Gives us like a sort of indication that he is the old Tyson. Maybe a few more fights and then they can start talking about, the Wilders and the Joshuas. But I want to rewind back to the first press conference where he announced his comeback. We went to it.
Yep.
And I asked him a question, being obviously sat with the media, and I goes, just how confident are you of regaining the world titles at one stage? And he goes, right now, my aim is to dance under those lights again. And my aim is strictly to fight in the summer of 2018 and then get a few more fights under my belt, and that's when we can start thinking about world titles, unifications, Wilders, Joshuas. So that kind of gave you some sort of an idea that maybe he wouldn't fight for a world title for a year or 18 months because he'd been out for so long.
Okay.
The fight with Pianetta happens in Belfast, and the week of that fight, the Monday, a rumour circulates around Twitter that there's been a deal agreed between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder to fight in December. But at the time, we were expecting the Joshua Wilder fight to happen, the undisputed fight to happen. But I know I'm baffling on a bit here, but if you remember that whole incident between Hearn and Finkel, oh, you're not offering this amount of money, that fight looked like it was never going to happen. Even though at the time in 2018, it was the fight to make.
Of course.
Because it's the undisputed clash. It never happened. Then that rumour became bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you all of a sudden hear that Wilder's on his way to Belfast. And then when Wilder turns up in Belfast, that's when you realised this fight is actually happening. So, Fury beats Pianetta. Not going to talk about Billy Joe Saunders and Wilder having a confrontation in Nando's.
Yeah.
So, Fury beats Pianetta. Wilder gets into the ring. Rowan McIntosh asked the question to Frank Warren, what's going on with Wilder and Fury? And Warren responds with, he's over there, bring him in, ask him. Wilder responds with, this fight is happening. Fury, classic Fury responds with, I'm going to Las Vegas and I'm knocking you the fuck out, you bum. The fight is happening. You're thinking, wow. He's been out the ring for so long. He's just fought 2 fights. Okay, they weren't spectacular fights. They weren't vintage Fury. This could potentially go 2 ways. 1, a risk that pays off. Or 2, this could really finish him off in boxing. This could go horribly wrong. At the time, even myself feared for Tyson Fury taking this fight.
I mean, a lot of boxing commentators, experts, this wasn't the fight to make. It was like, look, you've just fought 2 novices in the heavyweight division. People, Pianetta, no disrespect to them, and Sefer Seferi, they're not anywhere near that level.
Caliber of level.
Not that caliber. It was like you're jumping.
But you understand that though, being out the ring for so long. Then you'd think after Pianetta,
but then jumping to someone like a big fish, like obviously Wilder there, and he jumped the gun as well because that was what we were expecting. They're going to do the undisputed. Fury's in the background somewhere. He'll catch up and he'll challenge for the titles at some point.
Yeah,
but not that early.
Yes.
Not that at that point in the in his return back to the ring after being 2 years out.
What was your initial thinking when that fight got announced after Fury beat Pianetta? That it was happening.
I was in disbelief more than anything. I was like, what are the management thinking? This is a dangerous man who has brutally knocked out every opponent.
He was 40 and 0 at the time and knocked out everybody.
He was a knockout artist.
Considered himself as the baddest man on the planet at the time.
Yeah. So, and he's not even that. He was coming to the UK to fight him. He went to his back garden, like he did with Klitschko.
Yeah.
I mean, we know Fury's got balls because he did what he did in Düsseldorf all those many years ago in 2016, was it? I think
2015.
15. My apologies. But I just was like, this is all wrong. I wasn't comfortable. I didn't want to see something shocking happening where that could, his return back to boxing and just tragically ends, his career gets finished.
Ends before it started, basically.
Yes, exactly.
So, the fight gets made. So, the fight gets announced, December 1st, 2018. So many questions surrounding the fight. Is this the biggest fight of this current era? Was this fight too soon for Tyson Fury? Is Tyson Fury going to be proved as a real champion or an overnight success? Because we hadn't seen him do anything since that victory against Vladimir Klitschko. Was Wilder and his team looking at Tyson Fury as an easy fix? Was Wilder a real champion, as people say he was? Because a lot of people, including myself, looked at his CV and only saw a win over Luis Ortiz and thought, hold on a second, you're 40 fights in, and your best name is Luis Ortiz.
And there's a lot of question marks over Wilder and his technique.
Exactly.
He's not a boxer's dream.
And that he's not fought against someone of Tyson's caliber who knows how to use the ring, who's got good boxing IQ, who's good behind the jab, who moves his head, who's got good footwork, who, for me personally, technically wise, is the best heavyweight in terms of his movement. The build up to it was fascinating. They had a world media tour, so it involved 3 press conferences. All 3 press conferences were bitching and arguing and you this, you bummed out, you big dosser, At the time, a lot of people were saying that it was just to sell the fight, which I kind of found I was a bit off with that comment. Why would these two need to sell that fight? You look at it, apart from, Joshua fighting Klitschko and Fury fighting Klitschko, these were 2 of the best heavyweights in their prime. When was the last time you seen 2 heavyweights in their prime fight each other?
I've got a while back. Yeah, absolutely.
And then because of the questions surrounding this fight, with Tyson in his comeback, and can Wilder fight a caliber of Tyson's opponent, there was no need for these guys to sell the fight.
I guess it's, what they say, innit? Commotion sells.
It does,
It does. I mean, the drama, theatrics that we saw from Fury, we knew we were going to get that. I mean, look, if you look back to his previous fight against Klitschko, the guy came dressed up as Batman, and he got into the head of Klitschko. So if it's worked in the past, he was going to do it again. And to good effect, obviously.
He doesn't need to try and sell fights. He does sell fights. He is not... the thing with Tyson Fury is he is not... he's not made up. He is what he is. You get what you're given with Tyson Fury. You're going to get entertainment. You're going to get value for money with him. You're going to get hilarious...
Well, he's an American broadcaster's dream, isn't he?
Exactly.
So just going back to another fight of his, the build-up against Cunningham.
Yes.
Do you remember the press conference?
Tragically passed away last year.
Nazim Richards.
Yes, Nazim Richards.
Oh my God! God rest his soul.
God rest his soul. Great trainer and worked wonders in boxing. But yeah, he went.
They loved it. They loved the sound bites. They love his, his brash.
I think America needed Fury more than it needed Wilder at this point. Because I believe at that time, all right, yes, we had Golovkin and Canelo,
but they never really got behind.
But they weren't really selling the American brand of boxing. This got people in America talking. I remember he done an interview, Tyson Fury, and he goes that I went and asked someone in the public, do you know who Deontay Wilder is? And they goes, no.
Yeah.
And he goes, I asked that to an American. This is supposed to be their defending champion. He goes, I'm the one that's bringing boxing back to America. Yeah, America needs me in boxing, which is exactly what he did. He went there, and the hype surrounding this fight, especially with the world media tour, don't forget the face-off that they did with John Rawling around the table. Every press conference, every face-off, every weigh-in, they had separated. You do it once, and you think, yeah, do you know what? That's probably enough to sell the fight. These guys were going back and forth at each other every time, and there was no respect between the two. No. Don't get me wrong. I think mutually they must have thought, yeah, do you know what? I've got some ounce of respect for him, but in terms of what they felt towards each other, they never respected each other. Because I watched the build up to that fight religiously. I counted down the days for that fight. Watching the Lewis and Holyfield clip that they did with Showtime surrounding this fight was another thing that I really enjoyed. Lewis gave his reasons as why Fury would win, and Holyfield gave his reasons as to why Wilder would win. There was another part of this fight I really enjoyed. Fury done a interview with Showtime, Showtime's commentator. Name's completely gone out of my mind. And he opened up about his mental health issues. But he opened up more about it in that interview than he did with any other interview. So again, why this fight had, for me, the best build-up is because it wasn't just a case of two good heavyweights fighting each other. It was the best heavyweights in their prime fighting each other at the time. Fury had been inactive for so long. Wilder hadn't fought that big caliber of opponent yet. The build-up to this fight and the questions surrounding this fight, for me, is what sold this fight. And this is why, for me, it's the most exciting build-up I've ever watched in boxing, because I've been very lucky to have seen Lewis versus Holyfield and Tyson versus Holyfield, Lewis, Joshua Klitschko. But this, for me, had the best build-up and best hype simply because it was two of our best heavyweights during our era. And you had the questions being raised about Fury. Is it too soon? Can Wilder handle an opponent like Fury?
Yeah, definitely. Lots of questions there. Like you said about the press conferences, they were exciting to watch. There's a lot of context to it as well. I mean, like with what you said about mental health, what he was going through. And this was like a redemption for him. You know, that fight, you know, when he, you know, we knew what came of that first fight in particular.
And that first fight is the reason we got to see a phenomenal trilogy. We got to see one of the best rivalries the heavyweight division has seen. You know, yes, there was a lot of negatives surrounding that trilogy. One of them being the excuses Wilder come out with. The arbitration stopping the Fury versus Joshua fight from happening.
Yes.
But at the same time, what you got is you got great action, you got a great build-up, you had a lot of hype surrounding it, and you had 3 phenomenal fights. And you've seen Tyson Fury, for me, put in one of his best performances in the second fight. We saw, Deontay Wilder does not get the credit he deserves for these 3 fights, but he brought another side of Tyson Fury out in these 3 fights. We were never used to seeing, what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, we've never seen Tyson Fury on the floor multiple times in a fight.
We've never seen Tyson Fury on the front foot.
Yeah. It was it brought a different animal out of it.
That's exactly what I was
it's made Fury a better fighter.
100%.
Because we thought he's just this, amateur style kind of boxing, with hands up in the air and using that jab. But then we saw in that second and third fight, it completely changed his style. And after that, the second and third fight, when people talk about Fury and Joshua, I would side more with Fury now than I did previously because of that aggression that he was a little bit negative, against. This is what Joshua said about his performance against Klitschko, that you didn't really attack him. You just kind of.
But he made him look.
But Joshua obviously was more attacking, took more risks. But then to see Fury in the second and the third fight doing that made him, makes him a better watch.
I had the privilege of being at the first press conference in London.
Yes, I recall.
When they had to get which one didn't they have to get separated in? The most funniest moment at press conference is when Fury goes, "Well, if you've got so much power, let's mean you have a bit of a body spot."
Yeah.
And they both got up, and I was thinking,
the Alabama Slammer.
Let's feel this power from the Alabama Slammer. And then Wilder pushes him, and then everyone comes and stops it. And Fury responds with, "My wife pushes hard, and that you little bitch." It's just like entertainment throughout. And
it was mind games. Let's be honest. He really lived in his mind rent free.
You know what? I'm glad you hit the nail on the head there, because I interviewed Ben Davison after that press conference, and I asked him, "Ben, your thoughts on the press conference?" And his response was exactly how he wanted it to go, 1-0 to us, in his mind already.
Rent free.
But listen, Ron, at least we can say in that era we got to see 2 heavyweights in their prime fight each other.
Absolutely.
And this is why I had the Ron on the whole Frank Warren WBC belt thing. But obviously, we both had a choice each.
Yep.
You went with another heavyweight fight.
Well, we're going a bit, it will be 20 years ago, this fight.
It was year 7 then. Year 7 or 8.
Gosh.
How old were you then?
I was in year 11. So, sixth form. I was in college.
Was this when you was a Liverpool fan, right?
No,
we're joking.
Lennox Lewis versus Iron Mike Tyson.
Ooh.
It was billed as Lewis Tyson is on. A lot of questions asked about this. Was it too late in their careers? They were both towards the back end of their careers. I do think it was a bit too late, but nonetheless, to see 2 legends in that ring, sharing a ring, that was mind blown for me. We've seen obviously Lennox Lewis was was he undisputed or was he
The last undisputed.
Yeah, and it was this clash of stars, wasn't it? With Lennox Lewis with the that famous jab that he used to control his fights with good footwork. Mike Tyson, 5'10", short and stocky, that powerhouse kind of knocking out opponents. But like I said, this happened at probably in the wrong end of their careers. It would have been fantastic if it happened maybe 5 or 10 years earlier. Mm-hmm. But
when you talk about that era of Lewis, Tyson, Holyfield, Bo, I think we were truly blessed with some great heavyweights.
Yeah, the 90s was an exciting period, I think.
But I think majority of these fights happened way too late. I do think this fight happened way too late, but look, this is another example.
Yeah.
This happened too late, Mayweather Pacquiao, but we still got to see it though.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But let's talk a bit more about that. This was one of the few times, apart from this one as well, where fighters from 2 different promotional companies.
Yes.
That was unheard of.
HBO and Showtime, yeah.
Yeah, they got together. They were like, look, we cannot afford not to make this fight. Mm-hmm. And they got it together, and probably that laid the platform for these guys.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, you look at it, right? I mean, sorry to interrupt you again, Ron, but you look at both with different promotions,
yep.
HBO and Showtime. For the sake of the fans, they still made this fight happen.
Yeah.
We look at how boxing works these days, right? Boxing is a far more easier sport to be in these days now than it was in the 80s and the 90s and back in the day because you've got social media now. There's so many ways to sell a fight right now. Even British title standard level fights you can sell because you've got social media, because boxing and the world has gone on to a different level now. So I think here with Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, there's so many potential fights to make out there. They've got to look at this as an example. But yeah, back to what you were saying.
Now you went on quite detail about the build up to this fight. I mean, this was pure ecstasy. Just watching the build up. And bear in mind, we didn't have any social media at that time.
No, we didn't.
It was just what you saw on TV, and you just cherished it. You enjoyed it. The press conferences, the brawls.
The biting.
The biting. Mike Tyson. It never changes. That bite, that infamous bite. You know how much it cost Mike Tyson to pay Lennox Lewis for that?
How much?
$335,000.
You know what? I'm going to go to America and I'm going to make Mike Tyson bite me.
And in that famous brawl where where they're going to do a face-off, but they didn't want them to come too close to each other because the animosity was so great. But Mike Tyson didn't care. He walked over towards him, and then a melee just kind of unfolded, and we saw.
Unfortunately, one of the reporters got a mouthful from Mike Tyson. Put him in a body bag.
There was. I heard that Mauricio Suleiman ended up getting punched.
Glad somebody punched him.
And then Mauricio Suleiman was trying to sue Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson for that. We don't remember the famous words with Mike Tyson. Now, I mean, just want to get this clear. Who was he aiming those words at? Was it at Lennox Lewis?
Is that the reporter?
It was at a reporter,
because the reporter screamed, put him in a straight jacket.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not a body bag. What do you want to put him in a body bag for? Put him in a
straight jacket, yeah. And I just remember those famous words, and this is words that whenever we got into a fight with anyone or we wanted to intimidate the opposition, I'm going to fuck you till you love me, you whore, but this was a man with bad intentions.
Funny, do you know what? It's funny because the F word is something I've heard of you so many times. I don't know if you ever watched Mike Tyson do stand-up comedy.
No.
And he goes, he's hilarious when he does stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
And I was going a bit off topic, but he goes, one night I was going through problems with the current girl I was seeing at the time. And he goes, so I was driving home, I pull out my car, parked up to go inside, and I see the girl who I was with at the time get out of the car, and who's escorting out of the car is Brad Pitt. And he turned around, he goes, I looked at Brad Pitt 3 times, he goes, I didn't know whether I wanted to fuck him or fight him. It's just typical Mike Tyson, but...
Right.
When you talk about animosity in terms of a build-up to a fight,
yeah, I mean, look,
I'm surprised the fight went ahead after that.
Well, it was originally supposed to go in at Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. They had it scheduled in, and because of that brawl, Las Vegas refused to give him a license.
Went to Memphis, Tennessee, and
what I mean? Like, they were laughing to the bank because that was a moneymaker. Mm-hmm. I believe they both took 17 million or something, from that fight.
It had most of the marbles as well, the WBC, IBF, IBO, Ring and Lineal Championships.
Yeah. I mean, this, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, what was happening leading up to that fight? I think Lennox Lewis had just avenged his defeat against Hashim Rahman. Was it in South Africa that he got brutally knocked out? I mean, that punch.
The jungle, as they like to call it.
Mike Tyson was
knocking out like some Brian Nielsen fighters like that.
I mean, he was at a very strange point in his career.
I think he
that level of
6 times before that, 2 of the fights went to no contest.
Lou Savarese and who, I can't remember who the other gentleman was. Is it Brian Nielsen?
Brian Nielsen, the guy from Denmark. I remember watching that fight with Brian Nielsen. But with Lewis and Tyson, right? You have to ask the question. Was Tyson ever the same after prison and the defeats to Evander Holyfield? Do you think he was? Be honest.
What, after that Buster Douglas loss?
No. He recovered after Buster. That happens in boxing. It's heavitweight boxing.
It happens. It only takes one punch.
No, after coming out of prison, yes, I know he won a world title again, beating Frank Bruno. But do you think he was ever the same after the defeats to Evander Holyfield? Because I don't think he was.
I mean, there's an argument to say that, yes, I agree. But look at how his career started.
He was a menace.
Was he the youngest heavyweight world champion? When you're on such a high, to maintain that high level of performance. I mean, let's be honest. He's going to come across better and better, stronger fighters.
And he's successfully defended the world title 11 times as well.
Yeah,
Mike Tyson. But back to that fight, when you talk about Mike Tyson, and this is a point that I ask a lot of people, I've got nothing but respect for Mike Tyson for what he's done in the boxing world, but do you think he achieved a lot during his career, or do you think he could have achieved a hell of a lot more?
I think his early parts of his career get a lot of recognition. And it just gets deflated a little bit by the back end of his...
second world title when it gets...
Yeah, so it's like a contrast of... The first half of your career, it's been fantastic. Man, you're the baddest man on the planet. He was the most feared fighter. And then the back end of his career probably didn't take his training as seriously as he should have done. Probably, he was away from people like Costamato. His original group that he had. Rooney as well. I think that group.
3-4 years in prison as well.
Then in prison for 3 years for
whatever reasons.
So it
kind of did catch up with him, but would you say it was the biggest fight of that era in terms of the heavyweight division? Because I know I said to you we got some big fights, but they never really happened in the peak years. But we got to see Holyfield Bowe, I believe, is 3 times. Lewis versus Holyfield twice.
Tyson versus Holyfield twice as well.
Tyson versus Holyfield twice. Tyson Bruno we got to see twice. Never got to see Bowe versus Lewis, unfortunately. But do you think that was the biggest fight of that era in the heavyweight division?
I think it was because, I mean, look, let's be honest. Lennox Lewis had one more fight and then he retired.
Tyson had 4 more, and he lost 3.
Let's be honest. I mean, it makes you cry a little bit when you ask me that question. Did he achieve what he, But if he's losing against the likes of Kevin McBride,
that was just.
Who's the other one? Danny Williams. It just makes you sad that this guy who was so in his time, as ferocious as he was, to see his career end that way.
Let's say if that fight happened now.
What's that? Sorry.
Let's say if they were both in the heavyweight division now. Yeah. Let's say they were both fighting now. Let's say Wilder and Fury were back in that generation. These two in this generation. Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you do differently in terms of building up that fight? Now you've got social media, you've got live feeds, and you've got YouTube. What would you do different? Do you know what I?
Go on, I want to hear.
Do you know what I would have loved? I've not seen a lot of. I would have loved to have gone in a lot more closer in one of Mike Tyson's camps.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, just to see how he prepares for a fight. I mean, we've seen him coming towards the ring in a fight with a towel on his head and ready or not, here I come. That theme tune he's come out to a few times. But I would have loved to have focused a lot more on Mike Tyson during his camps in fights. Because now the world's our oyster in terms of all social media all these platforms we watch our boxing content on, I would have definitely loved to have enjoyed watching their build-up in camp.
What is that called? Is it 24/7?
Yes, in Showtime, yes.
Yeah. Where you follow the
Can you imagine
fighters.
just watching Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis in something like that, in like a 24/7 build-up show?
Oh, you just be in awe of it.
What do you do different, mate?
Well, I mean, that would be it. I mean, then you've got... there's lots of ways to promote a fight that they didn't have back in those days. Obviously, you've got your Facebooks, you've got your Instagrams, you've got your Twitter, talking about, But Mike Tyson was an animal. He didn't give a shit about that, What do you say? He goes, the difference between fighters now and me when I was there, he goes, fighters now are businessmen.
Yeah.
I was just, I can't remember the quote, because I was just a killer. Mm-hmm. That's it. I didn't care about kind of selling the fight. It was just his raw energy that did it itself. His famous words like, I'm going to eat his children. You know what I mean? Like, who the fuck says that?
I asked you about what would you do different if that fight was to happen now. Who would you let promote that fight? Bob Arum, Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn. I'd have to let Eddie Hearn promote that fight.
I think we're just saying that because we're British,
No. Do you know what it is, right? Eddie Hearn's got this sort of aura about him where, like, he doesn't give a fuck. He's just going to ask the questions. I remember if you rewind back to Chisora when he stuck it on him at a press conference about who's the main event. Is it me and Parker, or is it the Prograis versus Taylor fight? And then Eddie Hearn answered him, and he was just like, well, I don't give a fuck. Just answer the question. That's why I personally... And Eddie Hearn is the best salesman in boxing. So I think I'd love to have had Eddie Hearn in between these two during a face-off. Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't have minded if it was someone like a Don King in his heyday. Yeah, but I heard Don King and Mike Tyson don't get on very well.
No, they don't.
There was a big falling out.
I heard about Mike Tyson. Not only did he punch up Don King, but he also punched up Frank Warren in a hotel once as well.
What?
All right, final question.
Okay.
Who wins in their prime? Prime Mike Tyson or prime Lennox Lewis? I'm going first. Prime Mike Tyson destroys a prime Lennox Lewis.
You know what it
Simply
is?
because that prime Mike Tyson was an animal.
He was pretty short for a boxer. For a heavyweight. Yeah.
See, a lot of fighters preyed on that, but it was their downfall as well. Because they couldn't hit him. 5'10". All Mike Tyson's game was getting on the inside and letting those hooks go and those uppercuts and the bobbing and weaving. But Lennox Lewis, you've got to admire his boxing IQ, his skills, and I think in his heyday he was fantastic. He's last undisputed champion.
Exactly. You're saying,
does he get the recognition that he deserves?
I probably doesn't, because he wasn't as loud as Mike Tyson was. He wasn't as just absurd with what came out of his mouth as Mike Tyson was. That's probably why he doesn't get that same sort of recognition. And Mike Tyson was brutal, way he knocked out opponents. And I think from what I heard, them two had a spar when they were like in their younger days, and Mike Tyson got the better of that spar. But that didn't reflect in that fight in June.
On the night,
Yeah, on the night.
It was a tough choice to make.
I can't honestly answer that question. My heart says Mike Tyson. Mine says Lennox Lewis, just because I think he absolutely, outskills him and keeps him at bay.
Overall, it was a tough choice to make, choosing these fights, because you look at other great build-ups to fights. Hatton versus Mayweather, phenomenal build-up.
Love that. Can I add one?
Go for it.
Nazim Hamid versus
Kevin Kelly.
Yes.
There's a documentary about that on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a really good watch.
Kevin Kelly, yeah.
Even Mayweather versus McGregor had a good build-up as well. They had a lot of...
that to me seemed a bit more artificial, a bit more playing to the cameras, more than anything.
But what you had in that, Ron, is you had two characters colliding with one another, coming from two different worlds.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
I just thought it was too put on. I think it was just too much. I mean, look, who's the biggest winner there? It was Mayweather.
They both
made of course, but Mayweather made them more money, because... Yeah.
Final one before we bring podcast 45 to an end. What can we do different to make build-ups to big fights better? What do you want to see? I said I'd like to see I would have liked to have seen, broadcasters go into his camp, find out what he does differently in camp. What do you want to see different? Is there any way social media can improve, or what do you do different in terms of building up fights?
What I do, I like your idea about kind of following training camps. Kind of getting the
which we do now.
Which we do exactly. I don't think there's much more else I can think of right now at this point. I think every bit's covered by social media.
Do you know what I want to see?
What else do you want to see?
The discussions before the fight's agreed. You'd have to be a fly on the wall to get that type of access.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's things discussed in agreements leading up to signing of fights.
That's interesting, actually.
I would love to see...
Just love to be sitting there and
imagine
listen, how did this...
Warren, no. Joshua's entitled to this, no. Fury's entitled to that. Yeah. He's going out first. No, that's what I want to see.
I mean, just imagine, okay, just rewinding back. We were talking about Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis. Did you know they had two different ring announcers?
Yeah, they did. They did. It's showtime. Let's get ready to rumble. They did.
Yes.
But another thing...
how did they... wouldn't you like to be that fly on the wall when they were
and another
arranging
thing,
that?
Another thing is they had like a trail of security in the middle of the ring. That's how much... Well, look. This is why you chose it.
I don't care because David Hay and Chisora had a fucking metal fence in between them. So the Americans, they got shit on us when it comes to...
Me and Cammy had a big garden. All right. No, listen, you could dig... That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
The discussions before the fight's agreed.
Yeah. Maybe that to be released after the fight. Then you could say, look, this is what goes into a fight.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, times are changing. You never know what's going to happen. Ron, so all we've got time for on Podcast 45. We now look forward to, obviously, the fight between Martin and Ortiz. But listen, mate, pleasure as always. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you very much for your time again.
Thank you.
Hat-trick next week.
Absolutely.
And to the viewers out there, just a few reminders. Again, if you want to get more Lights Out boxing content, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, comment and share. And if you're a fan of your audio platforms, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, links are going to be below in the description. Want to know more about Team Lights Out? Follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Again, the links are below for our social media platforms. And once again, thank you very much for taking your time out to listen to Podcast 45 of the Lights Out Boxing Podcast.